Good morning. Thanks for tuning into the Kehillat Shari Torah Halacha Review for Tuesday, February 9th. We were talking before, just touch again on what we learned before about understanding the words. Important to follow along in the Megillah. Not everyone understands all the words in the Megillah of Lashon HaKodesh, of biblical Hebrew. So he writes here in the guide, Rabbi Rosedale here says, one who hears the Megillah read in its original Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, fulfills the mitzvah even if you don't understand what's being read. However, if the Megillah is read in any other language, which is allowed when reading the original is not an option, the person listening must understand the language it's being read in. However, practically speaking, it's almost impossible to find a kosher Megillah written in any other language than Lashon HaKodesh. We said that ideally you want to hear the Megillah read from a handwritten kosher scroll, and usually when they do that, when they take the trouble to do that, they do it in Hebrew rather than French or Russian or any other language, English. So generally speaking, we're going to hear the Megillah read in Hebrew. And if you don't understand what's being read, Shulchan Aruch says that you still fulfill your obligation. My explanation of that is that the neshama, our souls, hear and understand everything. So even if our conscious minds don't grasp all the words, there will certainly be some familiar words, Achashverosh and Esther and Mordechai and all that, and some other words as well, but there's something deep within us that understands everything we're hearing. So hearing it in Hebrew is good. What about if you're an Ashkenazi and you hear somebody read it in a Sephardi accent, an Israeli person reads it in the Sephardic style, or the opposite, you're a Sephardi and you hear someone read Ashkenazi. So according to Shilas and Chuvas Van Hagos, and a number of other footnotes that he references here, one may hear the Megillah reading from one who reads with a different accent or dialect. We're not particular about that. Some people hold a kosher Megillah and read each word in a quiet whisper when the Megillah reader reads it aloud. This ensures that they fulfill their obligation in the event that they miss a word or something from the reader. If you're using this method, you must then hear your own whisper in order to fulfill the mitzvah. However, you have to be careful not to distract others who aren't reading from a kosher scroll. They're just listening along and following. They're trying to follow the reader up there on the bima. Since the person next to you does not have in mind to read on behalf of others and listeners, and the listeners haven't. The person who's reading it for themselves out of a kosher scroll while they're in shul does not have in mind to read on behalf of other listeners, and listeners don't have in mind to listen to him, only to the Baal Korah. So to avoid trouble, it's important to note that there are some authorities who suggest reading the Megillah in this fashion is not considered reading the Megillah with a tzibur. So if for those who do have a Megillah and want to read along, you should check out beforehand if you really want to read it out loud, because some say that according to the Chazon Ish, among others, that this is not actually considered reading but tzibur with a congregation, which of course is part of the mitzvah if it's all possible to accomplish that. Furthermore, one who holds a non-kosher Megillah or a Chumash, if you're reading the Chumash or you're reading one of the books that we have in Shul, one of the 5 Megillahs books, should not read along out loud with the Baal Korah, rather listen along and follow silently. We said before the tip of following along with your finger. Several reasons for this. Some might listen to your reading and they won't fulfill their mitzvah because you're not reading out of a Megillah. Other reason is the person you yourself might not concentrate properly on hearing the Baal Korah, so you'll miss out on the mitzvah entirely. The Megillah should be read from beginning to end without stopping. So one who's hearing the Baal Korah's Megillah reading and misses a word or two, sometimes this happens when we're clapping, banging for Haman, should read those words from your own Megillah or Chumash and continue to read until you catch up with the Baal Korah. If a word of the Megillah was pronounced and it changes the meaning, similar rule to reading the Torah, the word should be reread. If the correction was not made, this reading is invalid. In this instance, the Megillah should be read again without a bracha. Usually we follow along, make sure our Megillah readers do that properly, so we don't worry about that. Now, one more point, and we'll pause with that. It's prohibited for the Baal Korah or the listener to speak from the beginning, the reader and the listener. So all of us are not allowed to speak from the beginning of the first bracha before the Megillah until the end of the last bracha following the Megillah reading. If the reader, the one who's reading, or the listener spoke during the brachas on the Megillah, or between reciting the brachas and the Megillah reading, you have forfeited the mitzvah of saying the brachas. It's an interruption, and you've separated the brachas from the reading. As mentioned, the reader should not interrupt reading the Megillah by speaking. However, if he broke this rule for some reason and spoke, he can resume the reading of the Megillah from the point where he interrupted himself. If, however, the listener spoke during the Megillah reading, and as a result did not hear one of the words read by the Balkara, he did not fulfill the mitzvah unless, as we said a minute ago, he has to start reading from the point where he missed and catch up. For this reason, here's the best practice. It's important for each person to be looking into a text that has the Megillah in it, so that in the event they missed a word, they can read to themselves until they catch up with the reader. Preferably, one should have a kosher Megillah for this, but most of us don't. And even especially if you don't know how to properly pronounce the words from an actual Megillah, you should use a chumash. Very important to do our best to keep our calm and quiet during the reading of the Megillah, because even if we're not so focused on it, certainly others around us are. So we want to give everybody that complete opportunity to be able to fulfill the mitzvah of hearing the Megillah in its fullest sense. Okay, so please join us again tomorrow. Meantime, have a good day.